good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Milsey, back at the Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Milsey Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list to the commander in front of us on my quest out brew the magic world. As always, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider becoming a member of the channel. Lots of fun perks there, and check out the links in the description for me. I'd really appreciate it. But today, just like I said with in the Carlock video, we're celebrating some of the D&D secret layers that they've done, and I realized that I've never actually brewed Xanathar, both for myself or for the channel, so I thought it'd be a ton of fun to do. Xanathar was a commander that came out in AFR, if I recall correctly, and is an interesting one in itself. Theft decks are always interesting and can be tough to playtest effectively, so we'll talk about that when we get there. But Xanathar is a 6-mana Dimir Beholder. Beginning your upkeep, choose target opponent. To the end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library at any time. You may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana as there were any mana to cast spells this way. This is a really fun ability because you kind of get to use that Beholder to shut your opponent off, potentially play their things, and just take real advantage of their deck. Obviously, this depends on what you're playing against and what you're matched up against, but at every table, you should be able to find a player or a player or two that you can really take advantage of what's in their deck. So the whole goal of our deck is to try to take advantage of taking our opponent's things. We're going to try to mill our opponents as well, because we have lots of things that can interact with the graveyard. So just mill them out, make them really hurt by taking their cards. And then we can also use our upkeep doublers to get multiple triggers from Xanathar to have basically shut multiple players out and be able to play things from their decks. I will give a small caveat off the top, which is that decks like Xanathar that try to take your opponent's things are definitely the kind of decks that can make people angry or can make people feel some type of way at a table if you don't know the people you're playing against. If you have a regular play group, I think Xanathar is fine. People know what to expect, and they'll know you, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you're taking Xanathar to a shop, I would make sure to be very clear about what the deck's trying to do, so that, you know, we make sure we all have a good time playing the game. I think at the end of the day, that's what we want to do, and I want to make sure that at the end of the day, that's what our deck's trying to do. So how is taking things going to matter? Well, in this section, we're talking about more ways to take things or take ways to pay it off. And I think my favorite in this two colors is Tasha the Wish Queen. A 5-mana planeswalker that can be your commander. It says whenever you cast a spell you don't own, we make a 3/3 demon. Well, that's great. We're trying to cast things off our opponent's libraries. We draw a card on the +1 for each opponent. They exile up to one. We exile up to one target instant or sorcery from that player's graveyard and put a page counter on it. And then we can -3 to pay one of those things with a page counter without paying its mana cost. I like Tasha because she's just going to naturally give us value as we're doing what Xanathar wants to do to begin with. And then again, we're adding more and more payoffs for casting our opponent's things and kind of just hopefully just continuing to tighten that hold we have on the game. Fallen Shinobi is a ninjutsu ninja that when it deals damage to a player, we exile top 2 cards of their library until end of turn. We can play those cards without paying their mana cost. A killer ability, and as long as we can get some cheap creatures that can't be blocked, maybe like Greenman next to it, we can take advantage of this ability. Or if we steal our opponent's things, we can potentially just overwhelm our opponents with enough creatures that we should be able to ninjutsu in something like Shinobi really easily. Grima seems kind of fun, a 4-mana 1/4 human advisor that can't be blocked, and when it deals damage to a player, that player exiles from the top until they hit an instant or sorcery. We can play that card without paying its mana cost, then that player puts the exile cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom. So go from one of our opponent's decks until we hit an instant sorcery, and we can play it. This seems great for 2 reasons. 1, we could find removal and deal with our opponent's things, or 2, we could try to find a bonus spell, like a ramp spell for playing against a green opponent, or a draw spell for playing against a blue opponent. There's a lot of different ways we could take Grima, and I think there's a lot of different value we can get from it. Nightveil Spectre is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer that says when you just combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top card of their library, and we can play cards that are exiled with Nightveil Spectre. This can work one of 2 ways. Either we can hit the person that we targeted with Xanathar, where we know what the top card of their library is, and we can basically guarantee that we can play it on a future turn, because remember that Nightveil Spectre lets us play them all the time while it's out. Or we could pick another opponent, one that we're not hitting with Xanathar, and start getting things off other people's decks. And then we're playing here a pair of two rogues that are great at what they do. Notion Thief, if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Instead, that player skips that draw and we draw. A great ability just for us to get extra cards. And then Opposition Agent. This is actually the first deck I've ever put Opposition Agent in on the channel. You control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. And while an opponent's searching a library, you may exile each card they find. You can play those cards for as long as they remain exiles and spend any mana as though were any mana may color to cast them. This should ideally shut down your opponent from tutoring, ramping with ramp spells, things like that, and really just taking advantage of shutting your opponent down when they try to tutor their decks to find answers. Op Agent doesn't stop your opponents from drawing, but it's going to stop them from searching to find things. And both these cards work really well to help kind of, again, increase that grip on your opponent as you're trying to just get more and more value turn over turn. Thief of Sanity, whenever it hits a player, you look at the top 3, pick one and exile it face down. For the rest of the graveyard, we can cast that card and spend mana of any type. A great ability, and it is in the air. So this is another way to potentially have more ninjutsu triggers if you want to. Otherwise, it's just a great ability. Hit somebody else than the person you're controlling. Again, just try to affect everybody. Thieving Amalgam's a fun one. A 7 mana 6/7 Ape Snake. Fun ability line, or fun type line. Beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library. So we put it face down under our control as a 2/2. And we can turn it up anytime if it's a creature. And then whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner 2 lives and you gain 2 lives. So this gives us blockers, basically. If our opponents wipe the board, they're still going to lose life. If we block with them, their opponents are still going to lose life. And if we're playing creatures off Xanathar's ability while Amalgam's out, that's more opportunities for their opponents to lose those life. Thieving Varmint seems great. A 2 mana 2/1 Death Touch Lifelinker that we can pay a life and add 2 mana of any one color and spend it to only cast spells we don't own. So cast things right off our opponent's library. It feels great to have one of these to give us a little bit of ramp for that. Mass Manipulation can just straight up gain control of our opponent's creatures, get their key things, take them out of the way. Same thing with Outrageous Robbery. Exile the top X cards of an opponent face down. You may look at and play them for as long as they remain exiled, and we can spend mana as the right mana to cast it. This is nice because we know there's a player that might potentially have things we really want. I mean, we could use Xanathar to target somebody else and then robbery somebody else at the same time, really just, again, take advantage of taking multiple players' things and just having a lot of things in our arsenal. Really, I think at the end of the day, I look at this as extending your hand. You have so much you have access to. Lantern of Insight, well, seems like the obvious one. Each player plays with the top card of their library revealed, and you can sack it to have someone shuffle their library. This is great because then you know exactly who potentially you might want to get something quickly off with Xanathar. And this also will let everybody else know what you had the option of or what you choose. This is kind of a downside because in some ways you're telegraphing to your opponents what you're going to do once you see the top card of their library. But what I like is this gives you... this may reduce your 1 in 3 chance to picking the right choice on your upkeep down to a 2 of 3 or 3, knowing exactly which deck to choose based on what's on top. And I think that is important. Yes, you might telegraph some information, but I think you get a better choice when you go to start choosing. Stronic Resonator can actually copy Xanathar's effect, meaning we can do it to 2 different people. Telepathy basically says our opponents play with their hands revealed. This is going to allow us to know what's in our opponent's hands and know either A, what to be expecting from their deck, or B, what they can do to stop us or interact with us, right? If we're seeing all the cards that are coming off our opponent's decks into their hands, now we have lots of knowledge of what's going on. And now we can start playing with their decks or playing with their graveyards, right, to really take advantage of what's sitting out there. Court of Lochthwain feels great. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of target opponent's library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type to do it. If you're the Monarch, you may cast a spell on among cards without paying its mana cost. So if we're not the Monarch, we get to just do the one and only play the one. But if we're the Monarch, we get to do any of the cards that have been exiled with Lochthwain, and they basically just start accumulating. Lochthwain feels like a great card in a deck like this because then it kind of becomes another copy of Xanathar, if you think about it, in our deck, allowing us to take those things. Well, we talked about taking our opponent's things, but I think we want to mill our opponents as well because there's so many ways in our colors to interact with the graveyard. We have Consuming Aberration. Whenever we cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards on the top till they hit a land and put everything into their graveyard. So a good way to mill. And its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in our opponent's graveyard. So Aberration gets huge. But we're playing 3 of the 4 Lazavs because all of them care about things going to the graveyard. Remember, the things can go to the graveyard in a myriad of different ways. Not only us just casting them, but using other things. Whenever a creature card is put in the graveyard from anywhere, opponent's graveyard from anywhere, Lazav can become a copy of it, except its name is Lazav Dimir Mastermind. It's legendary and has hexproof in this ability. I like this because we could remove an opponent's creature and have Lazav become a copy of it. We can mill an opponent's creature and Lazav could become a copy of it. Again, we have a choice anytime something hits a graveyard, and Lazav can ideally just start becoming the best thing that's ever hit the graveyard that game. Lazav the Multifarious is a little bit interesting. When it enters, we surveil 1. And we can pay X to have it become a copy of a creature card in our graveyard with mana value X, except its name's Lazav the Multifarious. I like this because then if somebody removes one of our key things, we can have Lazav become a copy of it and kind of get more access to it even after it's died. This works with some of our creatures that just create a ton of value surrounding them. With them playing Lazav Wearer Faces from Karlov Manor, whenever it attacks, we exile a card from a graveyard and then investigate. And whenever we sack a clue, we can have Lazav become a copy of a creature exiled with it until end of turn. This is nice because then we can take key things away from our opponents, right? And then have Lazav become a copy of it, kind of to add insult to injury there. Xanathar Sun seems fun. We can pay 4 mana to return an unblocked attacking rogue we control to its owner's hand to put it down tapped and attacking. And when it hits a player, we can put a permanent from their graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. There's a lot of ways we could take advantage of Xanathar Sun, but it just feels like a great attacker, great way to get things back out of our opponent's graveyards, and to continue constricting value upon our opponents. Breach the Multiverse seems like a great way to do it as well. Everybody mills 10, and for each player, we pick a creature or planeswalker in their graveyard and get it. I mean, a great ability, and it's not going to take long for a card like this to take over a game, considering 10 cards is a tenth of your opponent's library, right? It's a lot of cards that you then get to look at. Get our best thing in our graveyard back after it, get everybody else's. I mean, Breach the Multiverse could just potentially end a game, depending on what you hit from it. Extract from Darkness is pretty fun. Everybody mills too. And then put a creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Again, just take it. It's the best thing that's in the graveyard and bring it back. And then Mind Crank. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. Again, just a way to attack and deal damage to mill cards. If we're playing against decks that deal direct damage, they're going to make people mill cards. And again, we don't get affected by the Mind Crank. Only our opponents get affected by the Mind Crank. As far as the upkeep doublers go, we have the obvious ones, something like Paradox Haze. At the beginning of Enchanted players' first upkeep, they get an additional upkeep, so this is going to have us get 2 Xanathar triggers. And then Shadow of the Second Sun says at the beginning of Enchanted players' post-combat main phase, so the first main phase after combat, there's an additional upkeep. So this is nice because both of these effectively are going to give us 2 Xanathar triggers, but we get 1 right at the upkeep and we get the 1 right after combat, meaning if we choose to just go to combat and then do everything in main 2, we could potentially have the knowledge from combat to help us out with who we choose for the Second Sun. I think the Paradox Haze is the better of the two, right? Because remember that Xanathar shuts somebody down from casting spells that turn, meaning that we could take the key players out. But I think either way, you're going to take the most important opponent out from casting spells first, and then use your second upkeep to just get more value. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, right? No deck I ever brew on this show is complete. This is my version 1.0 versions of the decks, and that means there's a lot we can learn in testing. I think the 2 big things we can figure out with Xanathar in testing is how much more hand control can be really good for our deck. How much getting into somebody's hand and affecting the cards in their hand can be really helpful. That's important, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not just controlling the top of their deck, we're controlling their hands as well, and that's important. The second is, I love effects like Thada Abdul Acquisitor there on the left. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can search a player's library for an artifact and exile it, and then until end of turn we can play that card. There's a couple effects like this that are really important. We have things like the blue one that gets a creature out of your opponent's deck. There's other options like that if we want to get a little bit more control. There's also things like Corrupted Conscience that can just take opponent's creatures and now we control them. And Corrupted Conscience gives it infect. The card I think I like the most out of the 3 is Extract Brain there in the middle. Target opponent chooses X cards from their hand. We get to look at those cards and cast one of them without paying their mana cost. I like an effect like that, especially when we can really take advantage of the player we're choosing. Another card that comes to mind with something like Extract Brain to me is something like Mind Grind. It's an X blue-black spell. It says each opponent mills until they mill X land cards and just puts them all into the graveyard. Again, just a way to just mill and really control our opponents by just nuking their resources. I think at the end of the day, you got to pick what flavor of this you want, whether you just purely want to steal your opponent's things or kind of control them at the same time. But I think there's a lot of options. Playtest 1, so getting into the playtest, all I can do, I think, is try to set up a board state with Xanathar, and then it's just going to come down to what my opponents have. So we're just going to basically playtest up to getting Xanathar down, and then from there, right, it's going to come down to what your opponents had. 3-lander with Outrageous Robbery, Notion Thief, Curdle, which can give a creature unblockable till end of turn, which is great for all these creatures that do something when they hit a player, and then Tasha. So Tasha's great, right? We have a good setup here. Turn 1, we'll play that command tower. I mean, there's nothing really we can do turn 1. I think I'm setting up here for a turn 2 Curdle, right? So get the Curdle down turn 2. Now it can start attacking, and when it deals damage, that player loses a life, mills a card, and we gain a life and scry 1. Well, turn 3, there's the Lantern. Lantern can definitely be helpful. I don't think I have a turn 3 play, so I think I'm content to just put the Lantern down. I can attack with Curdle, and if I want to, I can pay 2 to give it unblockable if I don't have another attack. But either way, we should be able to gain a life and scry 1, scrying a Pajuka Bog. That is the 6th mana we would potentially need for Xanathar, so I think I'm going to keep it on top. I think I'd be targeting something like Notion Rain this next turn. I also realized that Lantern of Insight tells me exactly what's on the top of my deck, so I probably didn't need to pay to scry, but at least it does let you know what's there. Turn 4, I'd put down the Urborg, and I would be waiting to Notion Thief. If anyone of my opponents, I guess we know the top card of my library, if anybody in my opponents is going to draw a card, I'm going to flash this Notion Thief in. Again, I'll take a hit with the Curdle if I can, but at any rate, I'm holding up this Notion Thief, and if anybody goes to try to draw, I'm going to do it. Let's say for the purpose of this, that at least one person is going to draw an extra card, and I get that Sunken Hollow when we have a Lazav on top. That's good. Now coming back to our turn, we're going to draw, seeing a Soul Ring on top, so we can plan for that next turn. And I think I would just go 5 here into Tasha. Tick up. If anybody has anything with page counters on them, I would happily take them, but that gives me the Soul Ring. And then now, when I get Xanathar down next turn, or I want to play something with Tasha, I mean, I can do that. We should ideally be able to get... I think we'll be able to get Xanathar and maybe do something else next turn, but we'll see. No Shrine could still potentially be drawing us cards. I won't simulate that for the purposes of this, but we'll go to the next turn. Turn 6, I see a Thieving Varmint on top. Deceit in tapped. 1 into the Soul Ring. Xanathar, right? So now Xanathar's out. The Varmint, I don't have enough to play. But I could potentially get it, through drawing other times. But I think we would just, Tasha again, just going to try to continue to get her any loyalty. Unless there's something worth playing off of Tasha, then we do it. And again, here we're at a board state where next upkeep, we're going to pick someone. We've got a lot of mana up to use. We've got the Varmint that can help us next turn and the turns after. Like, this is where we're going to stop for the purposes of the playtest, because I think we've kind of accomplished what we need to show. Playtest 2, keeping a 3-lander with Worn Power Stone. That's great. Going to get us potential, turn 4 Xanathar, as long as we get one more land. Irenicus can copy Xanathar. So here's another way we can take advantage of Xanathar by copying it and having Xanathar go off multiple times. And then Wash Away. A card I don't understand why more people don't play in Commander, because it's just a 1-mana counter someone's commander or something they play from Cascade or something like that. Otherwise, it's just a 3-mana counterspell. I like Wash Away, and I think it fits this deck pretty well. So turn 1, we draw Opposition Agent. Well, that's great. That's pretty useful. We'll get Urborg or something down turn 1. Again, nothing we could do. I guess we could leave up Wash Away, but I don't think it really makes that much of a difference turn 1. Turn 2, we'll put that Choked Estuary down, revealing that swamp or that island. And I guess I'll just leave the Wash Away up. Again, nothing I can do right now, but that's okay. I mean, I think this is our next big turn. We're going to push forward. Turn 3, right, swamp into Worn Power Stone. And set ourselves up for success next turn. To turn 4 Xanathar, which is a big deal. There is always the option to, play opposition agent or hold up opposition agent and wash away. Like if we're at a table where I'm really worried about people searching their libraries or ramping, maybe I hold this back and just try to keep up opposition agent. But for the purposes of this playtest, I'll just play the Warren Power Stone. So we go into turn 4 with exactly 6 mana. If there's a world where I'm not worried about Xanathar getting removed off the board, if people are still setting up pretty hard, I think I slam Xanathar. Otherwise, I think I will, leave up the opposition agent again and the wash away. But I think this is at least one of those ones where you want to get Xanathar down as soon as possible to really start taking advantage of it. And then here, turn 5, 7 mana, we can play something from somebody's deck. Otherwise, we look at maybe Arenicusing, Xanathar to get 2 copies of it the next turn, hold up the op agent here, and just, now we can hopefully just start controlling the board and having some fun. But let me know, what do you think of Xanathar down in the comment section below? I love his Secret Lair. It's a ton of fun. Between it and the Rakdos Beholder Secret Lair, there's some really cool art. And we didn't get to see any of the cards in this one, but there are some really fun spells involved. And so I'm happy to see them get reprints. Love getting the ability to play with some of these fun Dimir cards that can control the game. I don't think I'd ever try this deck personally, but I think the deck looks like a ton of fun. And if you're looking for something like this, it could be fun to try out. But let me know, what do you think of Xanathar down in the comment section below, and I will catch you guys next time.